Hi everybody, welcome back, and we are joined by the one and only Mr Simon Furman, legendary comic book creator. So, just to start with, could you just tell us a little bit about how you got into comics before Transformers?
I was working for a publishing company called IPC, who had their own line of comic books. You know, they used to do things like the funny ones like Buster and 2000 AD on the more sort of kids action adventure side. And they were launching a new horror comic called Scream, which was kind of a companion to 2000 AD in as much as it was aimed not at younger kids, but just at the sort of action adventure 10-year-old plus line. And I was working editorial on that as the assistant editor, and it just so happened that they needed script writers from time to time, and I thought, well, I could do that. I used to like comics, I'm sure I can tell a story, and I pitched in on a series called, of all things, Terror of the Cats, which was, an inauspicious debut, but, I sort of came in about 3 parts into it. I had to finish this thing off, and I wrote a few other things for Scream, and then pretty much after that it was straight to Marvel UK and Transformers.
And obviously your run on Marvel UK is, very widely known and, considered by many Transformers fans to be the best comic book series. How do you feel, now that you're writing Transformers again for IDW compared to Marvel, how do you feel that, the nature of comics and the tone of comics has changed over the years? Because it definitely does seem like there's more of a shift to not necessarily less storytelling, but less dialogue. The old ones seem very dialogue heavy, whereas the newer ones seem more for trade. How do you find sort of writing?
I mean, I think the style of writing has just changed. It's not just comics, it's not just the audience. It's just that, once upon a time you would have thought bubbles, you would have captions that waxed eloquent on things that were going on. And that seems to become a bit passé in comics. So, you tend to just have dialogue, very brief introductory scene-setting panels, or first-person panels where you get those characters' thoughts through the panels. And so it's just changed a lot. So whereas you could, in a kind of Chris Claremont style, just pack every panel with, angst on what the character's doing at that particular point while they're punching somebody in the nose, it just doesn't seem appropriate or modern anymore. So, I've had to adapt my style as it's gone along. In terms of, I'd love to do, there are times when I've just had splash pages where I want to cover with those panels that go, and it was an apocalyptic Eve on the Eve before Unicron and these things, and you just can't these days. You just have to say Cybertron now, or Cybertron whatever.
Yeah.
And and then you have to get your sort of meat on the bones with either characters' dialogue, of which there's more of now by necessity, or sort of put it from somebody's first person and run the story that way. And sometimes it does just make them, because I don't like to have conflicting first-person things. If I'm going to sort of run a first-person storyline through, I want it to be that same character all the time. I hate if you've got somebody's first person then somebody else's first person, and I try and avoid that if possible. But I sometimes you get to sequences where really you can't have thought bubbles, you can't have a lot of expositional panels. So you just have to have. Let the art tell the story. A perfect example is in Spotlight Hardhead at the moment. There's a 2-page sequence with RC where she approaches this fortress in a swamp. But there was no way to have, she's not with anybody, she's not, she doesn't talk to herself. There's no thought bubble, so it had to be a silent page. And you can only have her talking once there's something to talk to or at.
And I think just the example that you gave there, I think that's where personally I find reading the comics that IDW has really revolutionised the way that Transformer comics are done with the Spotlight series. Because, like you said, with Hardhead, there's no exposition to RC there except what you have in the Spotlight, and really if you've read that makes perfect sense. And obviously, you can tell from the writing and things like that she's not the fun-loving RC that we all remember. Just going back to one more question about Marvel UK, Unicron being the Dark Gods, Primus, the more serious-sided Grimlock, you're responsible for all of that. How do you feel as a creator when you watch things like, or maybe, I don't know if you have watched it, but Transformers Energon and Cybertron, to find out that Primus, the character you've created, is essentially the main focus of that, and the fact that the 3 Japanese series primarily, well, the first 2 really concerned Unicron, as this monster, this dark god. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I always feel kind of flattered. I mean, some money would be nice, but you enter into a sort of pact with Transformers. It's not your property. You're not creating for yourself. So if I create a character, I do so in the perfect knowledge that it's not mine.
Yeah.
I'm not. If a character like the Fallen in the Dark Ages, if I choose to put that character in there, and I can put that character in there, really, that's down to me. Nobody's twisting my arm to put that character in there. So, I'm kind of flattered. I like it. I like the fact that, the name The Fallen is now in the title of a movie.
Yeah.
So it's always flattering. I'm glad they've made a toy of Primus. I'm glad they made a toy of The Fallen. They're not my toys.
Yeah.
But, do I feel... I certainly don't feel any sort of anguish about it. It's more a sense of pride.
Yeah, I would assume that would be, a great thing is just to have. I mean, almost 20 years after you've created these things, Transformers has flourished into what we're experiencing today, and you've got all that. So moving forward, past your days at Marvel UK, then you went Dreamwave, and you came on the War Within series.
Yes.
And you did 2.5 runs of that. I'm still waiting for the end of that 3rd series, by the way.
You may wait a very long time.
I don't suppose you would care to tell us what happened.
Well, I mean, I think now it's a matter of public record. I mean, with Dreamwave, as soon as I heard they had the license, I sort of put contact flags out to get in touch with Pat Lee, to talk to the people running things there. There was a guy called Adam Fortier, who was their sort of business manager at the time, and I had really good conversations with everybody, and the result of it was the War Within, and in a very nice way they kind of turned around and said, well, what do you want to do? And what I wanted to do was Cybertron-based stories, so we got to do the War Within, and for the best part of 2 years, everything was hunky-dory on the Dreamwave front, but what happened at the end was just a matter of money, really. It wasn't a clash of personalities. It wasn't an ego thing. It was just that they mismanaged the money, and I didn't get paid. And unfortunately, that leaves a sour taste in your mouth, no matter how much you cut it or how much time goes by afterwards. So really, Dreamwave, for whatever reason, went bankrupt. And I'm not going to speculate on what that was. It's just that, unfortunately, I and a lot of other people were caught up in all the flack, and you try not to listen to other stories about things that might or might not have been going on at the time, but a lot of things just don't leave a good taste in my mouth after hearing what I've heard.
Yeah. I don't obviously want to put you on the spot here, but the podcast that I record along with Andrew, who's waving behind the camera there, we had the opportunity to interview Matt Moylan, who used to work for Dreamwave. Not obviously wanting to put words in your mouth, or if you don't feel comfortable. Matt seemed to suggest that Brad Mick, it was more his direction and his guidance on the actual property that seemed to take it from being a very successful. It was the original G1 comic that they released, the first 6 parts, was the best-selling comic of the year. How was your relationship with Brad Mick?
Brad Mick, or James McDonough as it was,
Yeah.
I got on fine with him. I would dispute that it was his direction that caused the downturn. I think, there just wasn't enough hedge against the fact that once the euphoria period was over, sales would go down to a level, as they do with these things.
Yeah.
And I just don't think Dreamwave possibly hedged enough of their sort of flush times against the leaner times to come. I don't think it was any one person's fault. I think things just, once the initial sort of wave of interest was passed by a little bit, you were left with the core fans again, so the numbers came down. But I don't think James or anybody else was helping to kill it particularly. I think what didn't help it, and I don't know who's to blame, was the fact that largely their books didn't hit shipping. For the last 6 months to a year of the Dreamwave run. They, you know, so many books, particularly their what's the flagship one, Generation 1, would ship late, or you know, or a month or two would go by without one. And I think that inevitably just makes readers lose faith and interest, and they probably suffered with that as well.
Yeah.
And you know, also the other sort of flip side of missing shipping is that all your comics with Diamond become returnable. You know, if you miss your shipping date by a certain period, what should be a firm sale becomes a sale or return, and you can end up severely out of pocket because a lot of stuff comes back at you.
Right, okay.
So, you know, these things all probably contributed.
Just one more thing on Dreamwave. It's not really a question, it's more of a statement of fact, but I just want to say thank you very much for the 4-part Armada ending, which you did, Worlds Collide. I thought that was a phenomenal story. I just wish it could have gone on longer. I mean, you know, bringing Bludgeon back, Scourge, Galvatron.
I mean, I had a lot of fun on Armada and Energon. I didn't really set out thinking I would. You know, I thought this was going to be a slight, you know, well, it fills out a bit in my sort of work schedule. But to be honest, I got really into it at the end and was, you know, even more disappointed in some ways that I didn't get to finish Energon than War Within.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Energon, we had a real nice head of steam building. Alex Milne was doing some lovely art. And, you know, it just felt like it had a real momentum, and some of the stuff that was coming up, it's a crying shame we'll never get to see.
The Energon stuff, obviously, as far as I can remember, it's been a few years since I've read them, but the last revelation, obviously, that one of the council members is working with Alpha Q and stuff, and it was kind of like, what's going on? And then, unfortunately,
we don't know. But
moving on from Dreamwave, you're now at IDW. How did that relationship start? Because pretty much the moment they announced that they had the comic book license, they announced you were on the book. Was this collaboration, did they approach you, did you approach them?
It was kind of a 50-50 one, as much as, you know, I was keenly watching who would get the Transformers license, but actually several of the publishers who were in the running for it at the time contacted me. So, you know, I was actually sort of brought on board by a few of the publishers involved. So, you know, and one of those was IDW, and, you know, sort of, we talked a lot. And once they had the license, we talked even more. So it was one of those, it was 50-50. I was looking out, and at the same time they were looking for me. So we sort of met somewhere in the middle, and yeah, you know, we got it all sort of, you know, decided what we wanted to do, and we were off and running.
One of the comic book publishers that was apparently in the running to pick up the Transformers license was DC Comics. I don't know whether or not they were a company that approached you. What would be your take on Superman versus Optimus Prime?
Well, you know, I mean, and they can do that. I mean, I didn't think, you know, the Marvel crossover they did was anything more than, you know, crossover by the numbers. So, you know, I mean, any crossover can work if you actually make it work.
Yeah.
But, you know, I just didn't feel that the Avengers one they did really sort of was what it should have been. You know, it should have been a real event, and it turned into a sort of by the numbers crossover.
Can I just ask about that one? Because that was a series that got a lot of flack, especially on the internet. Did IDW have any involvement in that? Because the reason why I ask is twofold. Is one, it didn't seem like there was any creative team. It all seemed to come from Marvel. And two, Ramjet was brought in with the series. And then when the next time we saw Ramjet was in his own spotlight, where he was effectively offed, was that something, you know, where you at IDW, you know, made the crossover, and then the Marvel guys did this, and you thought to yourself, well, you know, we don't need...
It was one where I wasn't really that involved in it, you know. I mean, it came out of Marvel, but it, you know, I mean, Stuart Moore, giving credit, had read Infiltration and liked Infiltration, and wanted to set it very much within that, you know, sort of the continuity we'd set up. And IDW were on the board with that, and I'd seen the pitch, and I thought, well, fine, you know, it is what it is. But I actually found in the execution, it just, you know, it didn't really sort of drive a story per se. It just, you know, it just was a bunch of characters turning up and fighting each other, and then the other ones fight each other, and then the good guys finally realise who the good guys are. And, you know, and you feel you've seen this X number of times. So, you know, I mean, I think it could have been better, but it wasn't as terrible as some people seem to, you know, sort of say either.
With the whole IDW thing, Devastation, Infiltration, Escalation, obviously not in that order, Stormbringer. Did you have all of this mapped out from day one, where you were going with it? Because it all does seem very tight.
Yeah, I mean, the broad strokes, yes. I mean, there's definitely been some detours. There's definitely been some characters who've come into the mix who weren't in the mix originally and have turned out to be very sort of pivotal to it.
Yeah.
You know, I think of RC, you know, sort of who really, between her Spotlight and Revelation, you know, was... I should have had her there from the start, but I just didn't. Things have, you know, evolved along the way. But the broad points, the goalposts and so forth, I think I pretty much had set up, you know. I mean, I knew from the start, you know, things like, you know, that the machination would be Scorponok, that the reason why Scorponok was there was the Spotlight Ultra Magnus, and the shockwave seeding of the Earth was going to play into various things, you know, but it deterred along the way, you know. I mean, and Stormbringer was never planned. Stormbringer was never planned at the outset. Stormbringer was kind of a response to the fact that people wanted just to see more robots running around. But, you know, in its way, it, you know, as with most of these things, it just like gave me a chance to flesh out something that otherwise would have been a mention or a flashback or something. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say largely, I'm going to, when this is all done, when Revelation and Maximum Dinobots are done, I think, honestly, I'll be able to look at this and think, this is what I envisioned. But it's got about 10 different little detours that weren't there originally.
Just talking about the structure of making it stuff, definitely the Spotlights are a fantastic addition to the Transformers, because like you said, you can pick up the three main series and you can read them and you can understand them perfectly well, but having those Spotlights really, you know, really benefits the story. Galvatron, Thunderwing, two characters who you really sort of played with back in the old Marvel days, but are very different in the IDW one. Was that a conscious decision? Did you set out to say, okay, look, I've done, you know, the Thunderwing from the old Marvel comic books days, I don't want to do that one again, and instead turn them into this, well, force of nature that you did? Was that it, or was it?
No, I mean, I think, you know, I set out, it's myself and IDW to not do what they'd done before, so that related to stories, that related to characters, you know, so while we wanted to take the essence of certain characters, you know, we always wanted to put a new twist to them, you know, so if it was Hot Rod, we wanted to change him a little, rather than just sort of, you know, impetuous and hot-headed. He's more of a daredevil, you know, sort of just do or die type character, you know. We just, every time we tried to twist it, and, you know, it was nice when you do get characters like Hardhead, which had almost no sort of, you know, established story, and you could just layer in a complete character there. And Galvatron, we had to reinvent, because, you know, he wasn't going to be the future Megatron. So that had to be a new character, but with elements of the old. You know, hopefully there's a sort of, a little sort of reminder of the character, even in Galvatron, of what he was. But he's different completely.
With the whole Dead universe, which is obviously wrapping up in Revelation, this 4-part series, it does seem like there's a lot of story still left to be explained. Do you feel happy that you've been able to wrap it up this way? Because I think a lot of people were surprised that it was going to end with a 4 issue.
You know, I mean, it does. I mean, the Dead universe does end, you know, faster than I would have wished it. I mean, it was originally meant to be a 6-issue series. I think everybody knows this. And, you know, it's had to come down to 4. They've had to be 4 Spotlights. But, you know, within the constraints of that, I think most things come to a conclusion. I don't think it could be as epic as I was planning some of the final showdowns, you know, sort of. I think Optimus Prime and Nemesis Prime would have been a much bigger affair than it actually is. But that's more just the space, you know. The story would have panned out much as you see, except that maybe you'll get, you know, sort of in total 6 pages instead of 12 pages of those characters, whoever they may be. So it's contracted, but I think, you know, we hit everything we needed to hit. And I had the kind of safety net of Maximum Dinobots to wrap up other stuff, the Earth stuff, the other characters, even though Hot Rod features in both.
Just want to throw some quick fire questions at you. I understand that a lot of this stuff you probably won't be able to answer because it could turn out to be spoilers, but I'm going to ask them anyway. Sunstreaker. Is Sunstreaker inside of that body, or is that just Hunter?
No, that's just Hunter. His head is somewhere else, and part of Maximum Dinobots is him trying to find his head.
Right, okay, so it's not Sunstreaker at all running around in that body?
No, it's a Headmaster in the shape of Hunter and a Sunstreaker body.
Right, okay. Another question. Who's carrying the Matrix at this point?
Can't tell you that.
Because there was something very interesting on the Hardhead. There was a lot of blue light
Nemesis Prime's got something. I'm not saying it's the Matrix or not.
And of course we had Don's artwork as well, but obviously I'm not going to with Maximum Dinobots, which is the series you've got coming up next year. Is it
this year.
This year,
November
is it? November. Again, 5-issue spotlights focusing on each of the Dinobots.
Kind of. It's not really a spotlight series.
Right.
But in each issue, my aim is to give one or other Dinobot a bit of a sort of a mini spotlight within it.
Right, okay. And can you tell us anything about that series? I mean, you've just mentioned that it deals with the Earth characters, but is there anything?
Well, I mean, it's a bit, lots of the plot threads from various spotlights and the ongoing come to a head. We've got the Machination, we've got Scorponok, we've got Hunter Sunstreaker, we've got Hot Rod, we've got maybe Shockwave, I can't possibly say, possibly Soundwave, can't possibly say.
Yeah.
But, sort of all these things that, other things that have been out there do definitely come into play and meet some kind of resolution in this.
What was behind your decision for Sunstreaker to be a headmaster? He wasn't a headmaster in the original cartoons. You had Hardhead on Earth, who was. Was there why Sunstreaker? Why did you choose that particular character?
I just wanted to do something completely different with Headmasters. I wanted it to be demonstrably different. I didn't want them to be the Headmasters of old. So I wanted there to be a better reason for having Headmasters. I wanted the Headmasters to be a bit different in terms of the concept of Headmasters. So there wasn't lots of different Headmasters. There's one Headmaster who's replicated hundreds of times. So I hadn't really got a chance to play with the Sunstreaker character, and he just seemed to fit nicely the last guy who'd want a body share with someone.
Yeah, it's Sunstreaker. Yeah. With the wrapping up and the Maximum Dinobot series, one question I've got about that is, a few years ago at this convention, you were actually interviewed for the DVDs, and you pointed out, I think, that you had an idea for a Dinobot story you would love to tell. Is that Maximum Dinobots?
It's not.
It's
no.
not. All right.
No.
Is that still?
It's probably still out there, but no. I mean, this is very much the Dinobots of the IDW verse, and based on what we've got going so far.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, it's a series that, it's a Dinobot story that fits other bills as well as just being a Dinobot story.
Moving on to what you've got planned in the future, the original 13, or the first 13, sorry, I'm not sure which way you...
Yeah, I suppose the original or first,
I didn't know if it had a title yet or not.
No, it's just the 13 as far as I know.
Definitely something different, something we've heard mention of it before, but we've never seen it. The Fallen was in War Within, he was one of the ones.
It's definitely different, but it's going to pull on a lot of these things that have been established elsewhere. They might not be exactly the same, whether it be the characters or the dynamics or whatever, but I'm definitely going to pull in things from other bits and other sort of continuities and other incarnations of the origin and what the 13 are into this mix.
I heard that you're looking at Star Saber. I don't know if that's...
Couldn't possibly say.
Please make it Star Saber. I love the character. Have you seen the Takara series, the Headmasters?
I haven't actually. I've never actually sat down and watched those. I've seen odd bits,
but
I've never actually sat down and watched it religiously, if you like.
Well, if you could get Star Saber in that story, you'd make me the happiest guy on the planet, honestly.
I couldn't possibly say.
Obviously, there's not a great deal you can't say about that. So, last thing I suppose we'll just talk about is the Titan stuff that you're doing. You've been doing the movie stuff. How does it feel playing in that universe?
It's good. Better now we're doing the alternate movieverse. We were always going to be limited in terms of what was or wasn't happening between the movies, what IDW were and weren't doing with their movie continuity series. So suddenly it's, you know, once we hit on the idea of Twilight's Last Gleaming, which pushes us into an alternate movie timeline where the end of the movie happens in a different way, it's been much more liberating because we can do the stories we want to do with the movie cast. We can use whichever movie characters we want, you know. So we can do all these things, and you know, the second year after Twilight's Last Gleaming of UK stories all spiral out of Twilight's Last Gleaming. And it's just going to push the story in very different and wide-ranging ways.
And you've also got the Transformers animated comic coming up as well from Titan. How do you feel about Transformers animated? Have you?
Well, I like it a lot. I mean, I sat down and watched a whole bunch of episodes and just really liked it. I just found it, you know, easygoing, comfortable in its own skin. You know, it just seemed like it knew what it wanted to be, and it was. And I enjoyed it, and I'm not doing a whole lot of Transformers animation. I've done a couple of stories, and I may do some more. But I've enjoyed doing it. It's a nice change of pace. It feels just different enough to be able to kind of relax and let go of some of the usual storytelling things and just tell a fun, you know, story, you know, without the sort of the many levels of depth that sometimes I try and throw in.
The animated cast's quite a small one. It's not big and expansive like the G1. Do you find it better playing with those smaller groups of characters? Because I know with Beast Wars, again, with the series you had a small group of characters, but then you blew it out and, you know, you had...
But, you know, but if I did more Beast Wars, I'd probably pull it back in again, you know, sort of, it got very unwieldy, and I did feel that character suffered as a result, you know, you didn't get to sort of know and love everybody, like, at least in the first series you kind of understood Razor Beast and you rooted for him a bit, but it got diluted in the second series, and I definitely, if we do a third one, sort of rein it back in. So, in answer to your original question, yeah, I like the fact that Transformers Animated is a nice, small, contained cast.
Well, the Beast Wars, the second series, ended on a very notable cliffhanger. Transmetal Megatron returning back to Cybertron. Have you got in mind what you would do for a third series? Because it seems to set up Beast Machines almost perfectly.
I mean, we're not 100% sure yet what it would be the next series, but you know, I'm not sure I want to do a Beast Machine series. There's a possibility of another Beast Wars series set kind of before we meet the beginning of Beast Machines and just call it Beast Wars. But you know, we may do something quite different at this stage. You know, I definitely want to get the cast down in size and sort of reattach to some of the more core cast members like Primal and Cheetor and the sort of classics, if you like.
Excellent. Well, I think we're almost done, and thank you very much for your time. I'm just going to end briefly with just quick fire, just random questions, throw it out there. Who's your favourite Transformer?
Grimlock.
Who's your least favourite Transformer?
I would have said Wheelie, but I actually kind of really got to like...
That spotlight was very good.
Our IDW Wheelie, you know, sort of... You know, so much of that was Klaus's enthusiasm for the character, and you know, he kind of won me over with it. So I don't know whether I dislike any others really. It was only that bloody rhyming that got me.
Headmaster or Pretender? Because you've played with both of them, and
I kind of like my explanation for Pretenders better than Headmasters. I think, you know, I still think the sort of body sharing idea, well, it works if you stretch a point, but you know, Pretenders in the IDW verse are like spacesuits, they're environment suits, and that made far more sense to me than the original Pretenders, which was like, why?
Yeah, okay. If you weren't writing comics, what other job would you?
I'd probably be editing comics, or editing magazines, or editing books. You know, it would definitely be something in some kind of publishing.
What's your favourite curse word?
Slag.
Perfect. Well, Simon, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I hope you enjoyed, and you can check out the Revelation storyline, which is wrapping up. We've got Double Dealer and we've got Sideswipe coming out, so check those out. And you post on the IDW forum as well. You've got your own blog,
yeah. So there's a WordPress blog out there if anyone wants to have a look, and that keeps you up to speed with pretty much everything I'm doing at the moment.
It's got some real teasers in there as well.
And some exclusive art, especially from the UK comics, so yeah, have a look.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you guys later.